And welcome back to the Operawire podcast. This is your co-host David Salazar alongside my co-host Francisco. Happy 2026. And this is a special episode, not only because it's the first episode of the year, but because we have our first special guests.
We do. We are really excited to have Brian Jade, an international opera singer who performs around the world. This season, he opened his season with Otello, a role debut at the Teatro Real, and he's also making his role debut as Lohengrin at the Teatro La Fenice, and he'll be back at the Metropolitan Opera this season for Calaf in Turandot.
And 10 years ago when we started Opera Wire, Brian so happened to be the very first person we ever interviewed. And over the past 10 years, it's been amazing to see Brian's career just explode. So Brian, it's great to have you here. I know you're in New York. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. Yeah. Wow. 10 years. And you guys have come along a bit too. So congratulations to Operawire. I mean, wow. Yeah, I'm really happy and excited to be your first podcast guest. Um, I'm good. Life is good. I'm working really hard. I'm in New York. I'm spending time with lessons and coachings and learning, working on Lohengrin because it's coming up soon in April. So yeah, just busy.
And it's also very a rare thing for you to be doing Wagner. I know you've done Rheingold before, but people know you from the Italian repertoire, so this is also a rare chance to be able to see you in a German role as well.
Yeah, I've only touched up a few German roles so far, and Strauss and Gold so far, and I would love to do them again. In fact, I'll be doing Bacchus next season somewhere else. But in general, Wagner is something that I've always pushed off. I mean, my first time offered Siegmund was 13 years ago. And of course, I probably could have sung it, but was it appropriate for my voice? Would I still be singing in the Italian repertoire? Would people want to pigeonhole me towards just Bob Wagner for the rest of my career? So I said no quite often to Wagner. And even as recently as being asked to sing Tristan, I turned it down as well because first of all, I shouldn't be singing Tristan yet if I haven't sung Lohengrin or Tannhäuser or, any of the other major roles. Like in Tristan's kind of like the one you do once you've reached that pinnacle. But Lohengrin is a great starter leading tenor role in Wagner. It sits still pretty high, and it's a role that I really am looking forward to doing. So.
Yeah, I mean, and that's that one and Otello you just did at the Teatro Real, and obviously everybody knows Otello is probably one of the most challenging operas in the tenor repertoire. And it's Dave's favorite opera.
Yes, it
And
is.
it's a work that a lot of people wait to sing. I think a lot of people were waiting for you to do it. Why was it the right time?
Yeah, I felt like my first time, and gosh, I was offered it even earlier in my career. In fact, to step in for somebody else who wasn't going to end up doing it for an opening of season, and I turned it down then too. I think it's just something that you have to be ready for. I think that every person has their own timeline for when that is. I'd reached enough maturity in my voice and the color, the color of the instrument for the voice for Otello, because I find it to be in a darker, richer position than say somebody like Radomez in Aida. It's a major difference in Bach. You're sitting in the middle of the voice, and I think for a tenor, the strength has to be there in the middle of the voice because you're there all night long in the middle before you have to go up to the top. And if you're stuck and not able to sing in the middle richly throughout the entire piece, it'll really tax you. And yeah, it was a huge challenge, but Otello was like my favorite role ever.
So as my brother noted, that's an opera that I absolutely adore. What's your favorite? I mean, one thing is obviously dramatically, but what's your favorite thing to be like experience or sing in that in Otello?
Gosh, I mean, everybody's gonna expect me to say Esultate. No. And while I loved coming out and singing Esultate, I felt like, you have to be the hero from the beginning. You have to have the guts from the beginning. And I think that sets off the whole role. But there are amazing, amazing sections of music in this that I found throughout doing it. The love duet is obviously stunning in Act One, and it presented a lot of great challenges for me as a singer. And in a way, it was nice to be able to overcome those. Act Three has like some of the most amazing music in the duet before his aria. And of course, one of Verdi's only written high C, really, and it's kind of a scream. And things like that. I enjoyed so many different parts of this, but I think in the end, what really, and the piece is so well set up that like when you get to Act Four, if you can still sing mezza voce and you can still find that gentleness within the power of that scene, it is an emotional ride that I never expected, and that was super thrilling and rewarding every single night. I even got to do it one other time in performance because I jumped in for somebody about a week after I finished in Parma, and I just was dying to do it again immediately. So as soon as I can do another Otello, I'll be on the stage.
How does it compare to something like, let's say, Forza, which is another ridiculously long night, which I got to see you in La Scala and also at the Met? How does that compare? Because I mean, Forza is also very well known for like being extremely challenging, and also I think much longer, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, the difference is the pacing, I think, because the vocal range is very similar. You're sitting in the middle voice, thick middle orchestration for most of the night. And then, of course, we still have to be able to reach all your high notes without carrying up any weight. And that's the torture for most of tenors in these two roles. They sit very much similarly, but the pacing is the big difference. With Otello, yes, Act Two is probably the most challenging section of music. You're on stage almost the entire act, and it's extremely hard music, and it doesn't stop. It's relentless. But compared to having to basically start your whole role in Act Three in Forza and never stopped, it's kind of like, I don't know which is more challenging in that scenario. I think honestly, Forza becomes more challenging for people. Also, as a storyline, and as an opera, it doesn't have the constant activity that Otello has. I think,
Not Shakespeare.
it's not Shakespeare and not Boito, who, was a composer himself. So a totally different type of libretto and directly taking Shakespeare and putting it into Italian and in that phrasing, like saying, "Where far art thou?" kind of in Italian and things like that. The complexity of Otello with these three geniuses of Shakespeare, Boito, and Verdi. I mean, I think it really takes the cake as the better opera, but they're both very challenging, and I would say Forza's can be more challenging for that reason.
So before you were about to do Otello, you had you were very outspoken about a health crisis that you had during the summer, that forced you to cancel your entire summer schedule. And I can imagine that while you're having this, you must have thought, "Am I going to be able to sing this starting your season?"
Yeah, yeah. I mean, um when you're a singer and you're traveling from city to city, you're advancing money towards your next place of living while paying for home rent and doing all these things. And we had also just had a child. Um, like, your finances are very tight in general. And all of a sudden, you're out of work for basically 5 months without a paycheck. And I don't think anybody plans for that kind of um, eh, experience. I think in general, like we have an emergency fund, but we don't think, oh, let's plan for a half a year's worth of funds. And so that really presented its own challenges. Of course, health wise, it was something that had been going on, I think, much longer than I knew. I just saw the documentary that was made of La Forza del Destino at La Scala because I happened to be in it and they had the premiere. And I looked at myself on stage and I said, wow, because I didn't realize how inflamed I was. I think I was suffering internally for a lot longer than I knew before the attacks of diverticulitis, which is what I was suffering from, started happening in March. So once those attacks started happening, it really knocked you out because I was in bed for days, without being able to move, without pain, something that I honestly had never experienced and wouldn't wish on anybody. Um, and it was very acute for me, I think. My mother had the same thing when she was 45, and I was 46 now, at this 45, 46. And she was able to last about 10 years before she had to have surgery herself. And me, I had months and I was in surgery. And it was crazy. It's just crazy experience. I had 3 major attacks in 4 weeks. Um, the last one when I was in Greece, and I was about to perform there, and unfortunately that didn't turn out. And I had a perforation, and I was sent to an emergency room, and I was septic, and and in the long run, what ended up working out really well, long story short, was that first of all, I have to thank the Greek National Opera. They were there every single day. They took me to the hospital. They were with me in the hospital every single day. I was there for 2 weeks on heavy antibiotics. And that's the reason they didn't do surgery there. And then I waited 2 weeks at home. I still hadn't eaten any solid food in over a month. I was already losing weight because of that. And then my body was still inflamed when I went into surgery here in New York. And so that made me have longer recovery time and kind of, makes you question a lot of things. You're right. Because when you're in that situation, you're like, am I even going to be able to sing again?
Right.
Like, because you're so weak. It's amazing how weak your body can become so quickly when it's not doing anything. And I think it was a learning experience for me. I've taken the ball and run with it now. I mean, I'm in the gym 5, 6 days a week. I'm lifting weights. I'm counting calories. I will never be heavy again because I lost I'm sorry, I'm dealing with a cold. I lost like 40 pounds in the course of a few months. And so I had to start putting on muscle again and rebuilding. And the rebuilding of the voice I have to owe my teacher a debt of gratitude because we worked every single day from the second I could sing out of the hospital off Otello and getting that up and running in 3 weeks, which is too short a time, honestly, to get up Otello, but somehow we made it work. And also the team at Teatro Madrid, I mean, my God, Teatro Real, they were so patient. They knew that I was showing up with as little preparation as I would, like as minimal as I would ever have for a role, especially of this fortitude. And Maestro Luisotti, everybody was just super helpful, and I owe them all a debt of gratitude. And if it wasn't for everybody, including my family, my wife, I would not have been able to have done Otello. No, that wouldn't have happened. So it took an army of people getting me on stage and healthy. And then, now I look back at it and you say, okay, that was horrible. It was a horrible experience beforehand, but I'm looking at it as a gift, because I'm alive now and I'm healthier than ever. I feel like I'm in my 20s again. The disease is gone. And I'm putting in the work. I'm putting in the work to make sure that I'm healthy. And so it's not like I did anything to get diverticulitis. I just kind of inherited it. But in general, when we look at our diets in the country, they always talk about fiber, and they talk about how we're like the least. We're the people who don't absorb enough fiber in our diets, and I think that's a major thing. And so now, yeah, I have a very healthy diet. And yeah, the houses that were supportive, I mean, my heart is with them forever. I mean, Greek National, there's nothing I wouldn't do for them. They were so supportive, and same thing with Teatro Real, those two companies especially.
I feel like we don't like I feel like many times you see singers canceling, you see singers like, out of a sudden they disappear from the lineup, and we never really get to understand why that happens. I feel like there's still a stigma in this industry that you get sick, you're replaceable, and we forget that singers are human, and singers also have a lot of issues like normal people, because I feel like a lot of times you guys are treated as like superheroes. We're seeing you guys
They
like
have I mean, to be fair, they have a superhuman ability that I think
yeah.
once people experience that, they take it for granted. No, it's serious. Like what you guys do as singers is so incredible that I think when people take for granted how much goes into it and how challenging it is on the body. But yeah,
It really is. It's actually a really great subject to talk about because in general, I talk about this with young artists a lot because our industry is in a very critical point. I think it's been in a critical point for a long time. But like we do something that is probably one of the hardest things to do. Like if you look at all the different sports out there and the challenges, it's up on a level of trying to be the best tennis player in the world. It's on the level of always trying to achieve greatness. And in our industry, I feel like in general, there are a lot of houses that don't support artists anymore, that they're not focused on the people who actually bring in audiences, which is the artists. It's always been the artists. And when we go on stage, we're giving our hearts to everybody out there, whether they want us there or not, and we're doing our best at every given moment. And of course, there's always stuff going on in our personal lives. We are human. But when I tell young artists, I say, financially speaking, this is not going to make you rich. You have to love this job. You have to really love it. You have to really be dedicated to it as an art form and as something that gives you purpose. And I think that's also what kind of got me out of the hospital, by the way, is purpose. I found purpose in walking every day 3 miles because I knew that's what would get me out of the hospital. So I was walking in circles around the ward like a crazy person, like, I mean, I think we all strive when we have purpose and we also all strive when we have humanity. And I think that, in general in the world right now, obviously we see what's going on. If we were to be kinder and help each other more, we'd all kind of rise up. All boats will rise in that scenario, as opposed to kind of pushing people down and watching houses treat singers who even have vocal issues, even if that is what they're having problems with. I didn't have that, but if that's what their issue is, if they're a great singer and they all of a sudden are having trouble, it's the time to support that artist, not to just throw them out, because these people have dedicated their lives to giving in this art form. And for someone to just say, oh, they're not worth supporting, they're not worth it, and just moving on to the next, it's kind of sad. And it's derogatory towards all the work that people are doing in this field to try and be the greatest singers they can. So yeah, I would hope that can change. I would hope that would be something that we can make a change to in our industry.
Well, I also think it's really like you said about young singers and young artists. I think a lot of young artists, sometimes they're just thrown into doing an audition, doing this, and they're having a hard. I mean, I've spoken to a lot of young artists, and they have a hard time even getting one role, and they're competing with thousands of people, and all of a sudden, like, they're human, they have a issue, like, they're forgotten, and I think it's even harder for a young artist than if it's hard for a person who's made it to the top to disappear all of a sudden. I cannot imagine what it is for a young artist who all of a sudden has some issue, and they're gonna be forgotten. And of course, like a lot of times with competitions, the limit is a certain age and with certain things, and so it does create a lot of difficulties. And I feel like for me, I was very, very thankful that you were spoken out about what that your issue was, because I think it really does open up to young singers that they also should be able to, and also to other singers as well. We should be able to have these conversations without having to drag people down or like take
Yeah.
take them out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a New Yorker. You guys know me, and I speak my mind pretty much. I we have to do the math on it too. I mean, fees haven't changed in this industry in over 25 years in general, and the cost of living is 5 times as much. Now, someone like me, I'll be fine. I'm paying my bills. You know what I'm saying? I'm not living in the Ritz like Paparazzi did. I'm not flying private like Domingo did. None of that exists, right? And the last stars who had that kind of financial freedom are just about finishing their careers. And so when I talk to young artists, I say to them, you really have to have a passion and a love for this, because if you're going to do this, you're not going to be enriched. But also, how will they? How will they be able to pay their bills doing this as a sole career? And then if they have to pick up side gigs doing, I don't know, driving Uber because opera doesn't pay enough, how can they dedicate their lives to being an opera singer? It's like asking Michael Jordan to drive Uber at night because the NBA couldn't pay him enough. You know, it's correlative to that kind of thing. Do you think Michael Jordan would have been as good a basketball player if he was too busy driving Uber all
Definitely not. Definitely not.
right? So it's a real conversation in this industry. Obviously, there's no money in opera. We all know that. And so there are costs and cut costs. But, you know, you see opera houses only giving 1 day between a final dress and an opening to save money. But at what costs? At the quality costs, right? Because singers need rest in order to do their jobs. It's just, there's a lot of things in this industry that I feel like we should talk about in a way that is not just about saying, oh, that's wrong, but like, okay, and how can we fix this in a way that makes it better? There's got to be other ways to cut costs that don't cut on quality. And I think that's a really big challenge for most entendants, honestly.
And with this, and I think, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Sorry, Brian. No. I thought you were finished. Go ahead.
No. Lastly, just, you know, also the care and attention to the people who make this art form work, and that's behind the scenes, but also the people on stage. Opera houses are becoming more emboldened in a way that I'd never seen before. I had an opera house, a very big opera house, last year tell me that they were just changing the title of an opera that I was singing, that I had been contracted on for 2 years, and they didn't care whether I kept the contract or not, but they were willing to let me go from the contract. And I'm like, wait a second, I've been holding this period for you for 2 years. Now, it's your prerogative to hire me 2 years out, 5 years out, but I have a contract. Now, what was I going to do? Sue them over, you know, this? It would never, it would cost me more money to sue them. And I think they know that. And they didn't care. And it's things like that. And now I'll never work for that opera house again, but I can make that decision because I'm in a position that I've worked really hard for. But these young artists, they don't have that kind of, you know, facility, and they don't have that ability. They have to take everything they can take. And I get it. I understand how hard that is. So I really, my biggest worry is for the next generation of singers, really.
And I was just going to add that to add on top of that this is an industry where the highest standards are expected all the time, right? I remember this famous quote from Jascha Heifetz where he's like, I'm in a performance and everyone's waiting for me to make a mistake. Everyone in the audience, they're listening, waiting for me to make a mistake. And I mean, it's a horrible thing to think about, but in a way, like when you look at a lot of the opera conversation that goes on, you look at what people talk about on YouTube or on social media. I mean, that's what the focus is on, you know, like the imperfections, the you know, the questioning everything. And it's like, you know, there's a lot of perfectionism, expectations of perfectionism, and unfortunately, I think you put up a really great metaphor, which is sports. You guys are athletes, and you know, you guys are premier athletes, and even premier athletes don't always like perform to their highest standards, you know, and that's okay because even then it's still really great. But I think also there's this like this outlandish kind of expectation that everyone's going to be perfect every single night, and that's a kind of pressure that's also unfair, especially the higher singers.
You're 100% right. And when you think about that, like you just compared it to sports, right? How do we rate sports players? By averages? Like the greatest baseball player in all of baseball right now, Aaron Judge, probably one of the best baseball players right now, is still only batting 300. That's out of 1,000. if I'm singing at 300% out of 300 out of 1,000, I'm cracking 7 out of 10 notes. Think about that. So like, obviously I have to have a much higher percentage. It's much more hard if you think about it based on that, like, uh, what's it called? Analogy. Yeah.
Yeah.
But people online, we love that they want to talk about opera. I mean, that's all that matters, right? We all want them to talk about opera. We want them to negotiate who is a better singer here or there, and whatever excites them about this art form, we want to keep, right? But the negativity is something that's part of society. I think that whole like looking for the mistake and comparing people to recordings from the past as if a live thing happening today is the same thing as a recording. Or even if we took Pavarotti cracked, Domingo cracked, people cracked all the time. Giacomini, who's my favorite tenor of all time, had nights where it was horrendous and then glorious nights, and the audience always lived for those glorious nights, right? And I wish we were always living for those glorious, amazing performances. And that's why you should go to the opera, right? Is to experience something that's new for that night. I went and just saw the opening of Butterfly the other night. It was a totally different experience. First of all, I'd never watched that whole production before. I think I might have watched it one time, actually, maybe like 10, 15 years ago. But experiencing it in a new way, because I've performed Butterfly a million times, right? So
Yeah.
I know how it goes. And listening to a different interpretation from a Butterfly and in a certain type of staging and all that kind of stuff, all this stuff is magic. And every night is going to be different. And we're also coming with whatever. Like if I tried to sing right now, I'm under the weather. It'd be really not so great, but I would make it work, to the best of my ability. So it's always remembering that the artists on stage are doing the best they can possibly do for you. And it's not because they're not working really hard that sometimes they falter. We're human.
And not to mention that it's a team sport too, because you're all affected by everyone else. You have to be aware of what your colleague is going through in that moment. If they're not having their A game, or if you guys lift each other up. You guys are there for each other. And then of course there's the behind the scenes people also who are making, setting the table for you guys as well. So, and then the orchestra and then the conductor. So I mean, it is, it's not like you're in isolation either. This is very much you guys are playing off of each other.
Yeah, it's really important too. And those are the best moments. Like for me, like my favorite gigs are when I'm working with people I love to work with, who I know are great colleagues, who are going to be supportive, but also who are going to work their ass off every single night to put on the best performance they can. And you get that from conductors too, and the orchestra too. All the orchestras that I get to work with are pretty fabulous, actually. And it just depends on who's leading them at the time. And, we don't, as singers, we don't actually get the choice in that. Obviously we're not choosing who's conducting operas and opera houses, right? So sometimes we work with people we've worked with before, and sometimes we're working with new people. And that can also be a wonderful experience. It's very communal in that way.
And that creates also unpredictable. It does create unpredictability. I think when you're working with people that you already know, it's probably more comfortable. It's probably easier, and you probably can get there in a much easier way where the rehearsal periods are much. I don't want to say simpler because it's never really simple, but you have a connection, and when you have someone, you're thrown in with someone new or a conductor that you don't know, the language and the communication has to is developed exactly.
Yeah, you're right. And then, but there are also times where, like, I got to experience one of the most amazing experiences of my entire career from my point of view, because, so last year was horrible in so many ways. Like, I had deaths in the family. My dog Cav died, illness, but there are also some amazing highs. And one of them being the Otello, but also earlier in the year, I was in the Tosca at the Met.
Yep.
And I was in it with Bryn Terfel and Sandra Ivanovsky. And I'd never worked with Bryn Terfel before. but we were like this. Every one of us on stage were just so in sync in a way that was, if you put three people on stage who know what they're doing and know what they bring to the table and know how to work off of other people, you can have a lot of magic. And those were sold out shows at the Met.
We were there. We were there, and they were incredible. They were truly incredible.
I've never experienced something like that where I felt like the audience was bursting out of their seats to be there. It was so electric. And it made me think, God, this is what it was like in the 90s when Paparazzi had a sold out house every night. You know, wow, we should have this all the time. This kind of casting, this kind of attention to the kind of personalities you're putting on stage. It's really important.
So I wanted to actually ask, because there is a lot of conversation around obviously the art form, and we don't tend to really talk a lot about the conductor-singer relationship. So you can name names or not, but what for you makes a great conductor? What are the conductors that you like to work with?
My favorite conductors to work with are ones that I learn from. And it's been increasingly more challenging, I think, because I'm now older than some of the guys who are conducting me. So it's like I have maybe more experience in the business maybe than they even do sometimes, which is shocking to me. It's kind of like, what? But working with masters of certain things, like I've premiered almost every Italian role I've ever debuted was with Louis Otti, because his expertise in Puccini and Verdi is pretty unparalleled. So much so that I would choose to do a contract where I have one performance just to make a debut in a role, just to make sure he was conducting it, because I can trust him implicitly. He knows how to breathe with a singer. That alone is something that it feels like it's a lost art form. And making music with somebody, the collaborative experience. I think I'm not going to sing. I'm not one of those people who's going to walk into a rehearsal and say, I sing this way. This is it. You know, it's not about that. In fact, I'm lucky enough to have some flexibility, right? But it's about finding the balance between what someone else wants and what you want, and finding the joy and the real art of it in those moments. I feel like that's what the audience is going to experience. It's going to be really different every time, is the connection between, I mean, Runicles said to me one time, and I haven't really gotten to work with him very much because every single time we're supposed to work together, he ends up having some kind of cancellation that has to happen. But we did do some Metal Lescaus together at Deutsche Oper, and hopefully we're going to do something in the future. But he said something to me that I hadn't heard from other conductors, because so many conductors are worried about us being on time in the same place at the same moment. And he feels like the best music happens when one is pulling the other, and one is like, it's kind of this constant tension between the two parts. So the vocal line might be ahead of the orchestra a little bit, but that actually is really exciting because it pulls them along. And he finds that fascinating. And I love that. I love that tension, because the idea of the tension in the music is what keeps it alive. And it makes it different every single night for us, and every single production for us. When you're repeating your, 100th performance of Tosca, you say, okay, how much different could it be? But in reality, the experience every night is still going to be unique. There's no repeat. There's no playback. We don't have playback like the pop singers. We don't get to sing to our own track. I mean, I'm sure it's coming. I'm sure someone's thinking of how to do it, but they're already miking people in places they shouldn't be miking people, right? So, in general, I think it's just the subject of keeping that tension and keeping that excitement in the music. And that's how I look at conductors. I always like to work with people who can teach me something new. And I know for someone like Runicles, working on Mahler or Wagner with him would be like mind blowing, right? And there are tons of conductors out there like that who have some great knowledge. There's some great conductors coming up too who I really loved working with, like Spotti is a huge star coming up. Obviously, we have Rustioni here in New York now, which is a huge addition to the Met. He brings a real classic kind of Italian cultural experience to it with something modern as well,
Yeah.
and he's got a good head on his shoulders, you know, and he's taking over the world now. So, you know, it's things like that that are just exciting in the industry too to see. Because you know, I don't understand sometimes. Like, I'll never understand this. I'm not an entendant. It's not my job. It's maybe above my pay grade. But like giving somebody Bohème as their debut in a major house seems to me to be the dumbest thing in the world to do, because it's one of the most complicated scores to conduct. And every time, it's not like you can just copy some recording of Pavarotti and Frangi and say, oh, that's how these singers are going to do it. Everybody has different rubato. Everybody has a different voice. And so it's more about understanding style, you know? And I was a conductor. If my first gig in a major opera house was Bohème, I'd say, can I have some Mozart? You know, it's complicated, but at least it's pretty straightforward. Right.
I would even say that bel canto is also pretty complicated, because it's literally everybody is doing something. You have to follow the singer, and even that is complicated to even try to figure out what the tempo is going to look like, or what the variation that the person's going to be doing. I can imagine they look simple on the page, but they're not that simple.
Yeah, no, I had an experience with a conductor one time where, who will remain nameless, who came in with this really big idea, this really huge idea in their run, and of what it was going to sound like and how it was going to go. And then they heard me sing and they were not happy, because it wasn't what was in their brain. You know, it wasn't what they had programmed themselves to think it was going to go like. And I never do that anymore. I never program myself into a certain way. I know what I need to do vocally. I know what I want to do in certain places, and I want to try things out, and I'm going to show them off. And if someone likes it, we're going to work with it. If they don't like it, maybe we can move on from it or find a way to negotiate it, right? But it's always got to be that collaborative conversation. There's no dictatorships. There's no dictatorships in opera. Not in my book.
There shouldn't be. And I was actually interested. You know, I was having a conversation with someone the other day that, you know, then you bring in the director, and the director has their ideas. And I mean, the difference between theater and opera is that the music is still king, right? Everything is beholden to how fast a passage will go, or how long a singer can hold a line or not. And the director has to fit within that. And yet, we've seen in opera, like, you know, we actually had the experience, and I like this production. My brother doesn't. We saw the Berlin Rusalka, which cuts right in the middle of the second act, right? And for some people like my brother, that's a big no-no, because the music. And for me, you know, I give the production grace, because I think the concept actually went to interesting places. But now we're kind of in this world where, you know, now directors, like you said, are getting a little bit, you know, are going places that maybe wasn't anticipated before. And so that also is going to add layers to that dynamic, because now you got to take them into account with the conductor and obviously the singer. So
Yeah, I think opera houses kind of may have lost the, you know, the vision in the long run by giving so much power to one person or another. I think directors are really important. They're super important to tell the story. As long as they're telling the story, I'm never gonna have a problem with any director, really. And I'll tell them if I can do something or not, because I know myself well enough to know whether or not I can jump off a building in some set in order to make something work or not. But in general, it's just always about having the conversation. It's always about knowing what you're getting in advance too. And like, that's the other thing with productions, you know, when you have directors that have never directed opera before, coming into a new world. Like, we had some musical theater people, right, putting on productions. That's really different world. It's a very different thing. And they're not used to people having to sing forward all the time for their voices to reach an audience, because there's no microphones, or they are used to smaller stages because people use microphones, but also because sets can change in a different moving kind of way than they can in opera. And so it presents more challenges, but it's not something that we can't build off of. It's not something that we can't keep developing, I think. It's just kind of feels like early days in a way on that kind of subject, actually.
It's interesting, because I think a lot of directors think that every singer could do the same exact thing, and there are singers who can do certain things, others can do other things. Some will lie on the floor for 10 minutes, others cannot do that. Others literally don't have that facility. So everyone has to be, you have to be able to adapt to the singers that you're being given, and you can't expect, and the director needs to understand they're singing. You guys are singing and you guys are literally using your entire body to perform, which again is not something that if you come from Broadway or if you come from I don't know, from even from cinema, it's a different use of the language. And I think you only can understand that if you understand what opera is, or you understand how a singer performs.
Yeah, I actually think it would be really great. I mean, some of the greatest conductors I know learned how to sing, or at least had to learn how to sing for a period of time. In fact, Luisotti was a singer. He had learned how to sing to a certain degree. So he understands a lot of what it takes to do this job physically. And I think that's really important. I think everybody who's involved in opera, intendants, should understand voices. Shocking, right? But like, but
Imagine.
not only should they understand but they should care about voices. They should have something. There should be. I mean, they're in the field of opera. They're in the field of the voice with orchestration. I mean, if you're not in love with that and you're not obsessed with that, why are you doing that job, right? It's something. It's when you're casting too. Casting, you have to understand voices and understand who's going to pair up with somebody well, not just who's going to sell tickets. Of course, that's really important. That's always important. But understanding voices that match together or not means you actually have to understand how they produce the voice to begin with, and that takes a lot of experience. That's something that not everybody has.
So to conclude this episode, I want to ask you about the recording that you are right now listening to, or if you're listening to any recordings while you're studying the score of Lohengrin.
No. I specifically haven't listened to recordings. Most of the recordings that are out there are going to be for I'm sort of lighter, a little bit lighter colored voices than mine. And I never wanted to get into like copying. I never like to do that anyway. So no, I've not gotten to the stage of listening too much to other people's interpretations. What I usually do, and this is what I do for every role I do, is I'll start with just obviously the text, and then obviously translating and all that stuff you do for a score. But I'll have someone play through the whole score with piano, vocal lines, make sure I'm learning all the right notes and all the music and making my own ideas of musical phrasing. And then I'll find out if I was paired up well in my own brain with the style or not. And I find it to be a fascinating exploration, actually, in that way, because you're bringing what you want to the table while also, respecting traditions that are necessary, and things that also traditions that are necessary for singers to do their job in the first place. We talked about Forza earlier. Right. Back in the day, most tenors didn't have to sing that whole role. There was a huge cut in Act 3. I mean, that massive 12-minute duet was probably like either 2 minutes or didn't exist. And it's very fascinating that today, where things are already harder for singers, they're making it harder by making them perform the entire opera without cuts all the time. It's like, what were we thinking? There was a reason why people cut things in the past. Maybe because it was almost too challenging, Things like that are important to remember, I think.
Fair. One last question. You are known for your Puccini roles and your Verdi roles, and obviously a lot of other things, but those two composers I'd say are pretty central to your repertoire. If you had to pick one, which one?
So if you asked me this question 5 years ago, I probably would have said Puccini. I'd sung more Puccini. I felt like I related very well to the bombastic, having to cut through all those horns that are doubling you in Turandot, and the squillo that's necessary to ride over that orchestration. But Verdi just won me over. if I have to choose, I choose Verdi. And it's because of Otello. In the end, I think it's by far the greatest masterpiece I've ever gotten to perform, and the pure genius of how it's written and the way the musical line tells the story so perfectly. To me, it's got to be Verdi in that scenario. Yeah, I have to finish with Verdi.
That's a great place to end.
It's hard. It's a hard decision.
And we hope to be able to see that Otello very soon. I think we're very excited about that.
There's some big ones coming up, so we'll look forward to next season. Next season is at least two major houses.
Yeah. Can't wait to hear those announcements.
Okay.
We can't.
All right.
It's so great chatting with you guys.
Yes. Thank you so much, Brian, for being here, for being our first guest, for an awesome conversation. And we want to thank all of our listeners as well for being here with us.
And if you want to know more about Operawire, check us out on our social media channels, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, on YouTube to listen to this podcast, also wherever you find podcasts. Thank you so much, Brian, and see you guys next time.
We'll see you at the opera.